Hey everyone, welcome back to Mind Keys. So in today's video, I wanted to tackle a bit of a deeper topic here and answer a question that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, which is probably something you've been wondering about because it tends to be one of these nearly universal issues that we all struggle with. And that is this question of self-love and why so many people all over the world struggle with experiencing self-love. And I wanted to give you a few answers, a few insights and explanations, or at least a few possible explanations, not to say that they're the only, as to why that might be, and start to give you a sense of how you might be able to transform it a bit. So if that's of interest with you, then let's go ahead and dive into the topic. And super briefly, if you're new to the channel, have never seen any of my videos before, hello, my name is Dave. I'm a coach, I'm a hypnotherapist, and I talk a lot on this channel about topics like psychedelics, spirituality, awakening, personal development, self-actualization, personal growth, personal transformation, leveling up, healing, awakening, all that kind of good stuff. So if that's your bag, you are certainly right place. And I'm honored to have your views and your time and your attention. So thanks for watching. All right, let's go ahead and get into the topic because this is a really important and I think juicy one. So let's get it. So like a lot of other questions that come up when it comes to psychology and understanding this fucking meat suit and being a human being and how we work and why we are the way we are, there's a great place to start that I haven't really spoken about that much that I think is super underrated when it comes to psychology and self-awareness, and is especially important when we're asking big, deep, existential, spiritual questions like, why don't I love myself? Why don't people love themselves? Why do we have a global epidemic of a deficiency of self-love, right? And this starting point is really very simple. And it's something some of you will be familiar with, so others of you won't. And I think it's super, super key. And that is to set all of this in an evolutionary context. So the first place to start with a lot of psychological issues, a lot of psychological questions, if you want to know why, if you want to know what the reason for it is to begin with understanding the kind of the grain, if you will, of how we've been wired through our evolutionary history. So we start with an evolutionary psychology perspective on this. Now, when it comes to self-love, from an evolutionary perspective, there are a couple different deep needs that are there. So the first thing you want to understand when it comes to evolution and human beings is that evolution did not select for our happiness. Evolution selected for our survival first. Happiness is incidental and secondary to survival and then reproduction. Those are our primary drives. Survival, passing the genes on to the next generation. That's what we're built to do. Our brains are survival machines, not happiness machines per se. They are, or fundamentally, let's say, because they are happiness machines and they are a lot of other types of machines as well. Our brains are miraculous and capable of so very much, but fundamentally the most basic program in our genes and in our bodies and in our biological intelligence that runs the show at the most foundational level of being a human being is to survive and to reproduce. So there are a couple needs that human beings have that drive, that are part of this survival drive, that drive much of our behavior and that are responsible for the way we are. And these kinds of things, it blows my mind how often they are kind of overlooked, under-considered, and not really factored into our psychology or our understandings of spirituality or our understandings of our relationships to each other and to the world and why the world is the way it is. This shit is so obvious once you get it. But if you don't know to look in this area, then we end up with these weird questions. So, let me just lay out these couple of needs that I think are really relevant to the question of self-love. So the first one is the need for belonging, right? So as a human being, one of our fundamental needs in order to survive, because we are tribal group creatures who are largely nomadic for most of our history, we're organized to live in small hunter-gatherer tribes of roughly no more than 150 people, right? And so belonging in that kind of small group environment is key. Chances are, historically speaking, in nature, any human being that was left to be by themselves alone in nature would probably die, whether it was from starvation or being predated by another predator animal, or being killed off by a warring tribe, or what have you. Abandonment to the nervous system of a human being at the deepest level generally equals death. Now, I know that's kind of an intense thing to say, but think about that and really take that in and wrap your head around it. Doesn't that make sense when we start to think about why abandonment issues are so common, why social anxiety is such a thing, why why people are the way we are, right? We have a deep need to belong, and that need for belonging is a survival program, right? It's not about being happy. It's not about being liked. It's not about any of that. It's about, I need others around me to make sure I eat, to make sure that I don't die, that I'm protected from animals, that I have shelter, this kind of a thing, right? The other primary need that we have to really pull into this conversation to really understand, why we struggle with self-love so much is what I call hierarchy anxiety. So I've been really trying to map out a good explanation of different ways of understanding the ego for you, because in this conversation of psychedelics and spirituality and awakening, you run into this conversation of ego death, letting go of the ego. The ego is the problem. It's such a pervasive kind of mimetic concept in spirituality and in psychedelics, right? And I have a lot to say about it, having explored this question at depth and having studied the ego from all kinds of different psychological perspectives, from Buddhist and Hindu perspectives, from just my own experiential, exploration. Those are all conversations for other videos, but one facet or aspect of what we think of as ego, which is really this umbrella term for a lot of different, parts of being human, is what we could call hierarchy anxiety. Now, this is, again, another topic for other videos, because this is a huge, deep, again, another kind of fundamental, bottom of the barrel, crucial thing to understand about being human. That every human being, as part of our drive to belong to the tribe, as part of our drive to belong to a society, a culture, a group that will help, increase our chances of survival, we have status anxiety inside of that tribe, because the higher up we are in, the social ranking, the higher up we are in that tribal, hierarchy, the more likely we are to be protected, looked after, cared for, provided for, the more we will be valued and esteemed and rewarded, and the more likely we are, quite frankly, to survive in that case. So we have this kind of hierarchy anxiety built on top of a deep need for belonging, which is built on top of our just primary fundamental mammalian drive for survival. So that is all at the root of a need for self-love. But let me kind of unpack how that all makes sense, how that looks. Okay, so in order to really ensure our survival and ensure that belonging, we generally have to, make sure that we are adhering to the rules, to the value systems, and to the kind of way of life that the tribe, runs with. There's obviously throughout history so many different ways that human beings have organized lifestyles, different ways that tribes operate, different rules, different value systems, different rituals, different modes of being, different, relational kind of boundaries and taboos, all kinds of stuff like that, right? So in order to survive, in order to, ascend up the hierarchy, in order to retain and secure that belonging, which likely, ensures our survival, we have to make sure that we are belonging properly to the tribe, to the society around us. So the way that we do that is that we are highly sensitive to the rules of the tribe. We're highly sensitive to any subtle dynamics that imply that we don't belong, or that we don't get it, or that we, aren't on the in-group of the tribe, right? And so because of this, as we're growing up, as we are, growing up from wild children that are not socialized and don't have any particular sense of, right and wrong, or, rules, or, kind of moral compass, where just kind of grow up as somewhat of a blank slate. I do think there's temperament there, and I do think there's biological kind of shapes to our character, but fundamentally we're wide open in terms of, ways of operating and ways of behaving. We're very flexible as children, but we grow up with the sensitivity to the feedback that shows us what is and is not the right way of behaving, so that we know whether or not we are fitting in with the tribe, whether or not we are belonging, so that we know whether or not we are likely to survive, right? So we have this kind of deep sensitivity to belonging that is often shaped by our parents, and the feedback that our parents give us and the way our parents give us their feedback. So it's not only what our parents reflect back to us, but it's the way they reflect it back to us, right? But on top of that, it's their reflection. So our parents are kind of an intermediary or proxy for society and society's rules, and what society will expect of us or require of us in order to approve of us and give us that sense of belonging, that sense of connection, that sense of, being a part of the tribe again. So we are highly sensitive to this feedback because our biology is built upon this program that says must belong in order to survive. So we're always kind of looking at our environment at a very deep level, from the unconscious outward, in terms of assessing what it is I need to do to ensure my belonging. So we are highly, highly, highly sensitive to any negative feedback in particular, obviously. So rejections, denials, critiques, all of these tend to land really hard, as most of us know, right? Now, what this does in general for persons developing psychology is this creates internalized characters or roles, so sorry, I kind of had to stop for a second and think about how I want to phrase and say what I want to say here. So I actually want to pivot in our conversation here in the video, and I want to introduce you to a new concept, or at least it'll be new to some of you, probably new to others of you, that I haven't talked about at all on the channel yet. And this is the idea of parts and IFS therapy, or internal family systems therapy. So the basic idea goes like this. Every human being adapts and grows up naturally in order to be a well-balanced human being in our social environment with what are called parts of our personality. So parts are almost what you can think of as like little sub-parts, or little sub-personalities rather, that are organized around particular abilities and capacities, around particular value sets, around particular mindsets or ways of being, particular modes of being, et cetera, et cetera. So some examples might be that part of you is, super tough, disciplined person when you need to be, and then another part of you is totally lazy. Or part of you is, super social and extroverted. Another part of you is super introverted and likes to be alone for long stretches of time. Maybe part of you is, super creative, and then another part of you is hyper rational and hyper logical, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of us grow as we grow as human beings to develop these various different parts of our personality. And you can almost think of them as like facets on a jewel. Like depending on how the light is hitting that particular jewel, the jewel is one thing, but it has all these different facets that will shine with different colors. So when it comes to human beings, we have these different parts, and they are organized around different value sets and their sub-personalities with their own little mindsets, their own agendas, their own needs, their own drives. So we have basically like a very mild, integrated kind of form of what you might think of as multiple personality disorder. So this is the theory in IFS, in internal family systems. So this is a different way of understanding being a human being. And the idea is that we naturally develop these parts through different life experiences as we, kind of grow up and move through life. Sometimes out of deficiencies in our environment, we needed something that wasn't there, so we stepped up and became it, right? Sometimes out of just an adverse experience, or sometimes out of just an opportunity. Maybe we develop a creative side of our personality just because we discovered one day that we love painting, and so we become painters, and we have part of us that's a painter, et cetera, right? So we have these multiple parts to our personality that are all, sub-organizations of the sum total of our capacities and personality, or at least some of them. I do believe that our personalities and our deep capacities so much more than what we tap into. And I do believe that there's a profound deep intelligence that unites all our parts and animates all our parts and is so much more than anything most of us realize. But we're talking personality, not the whole system, not the soul, not the spiritual self. We're just talking personality here. So with personality, we have parts. And so these parts are like little sub-personalities or facets of the personality, like I've said a few times. Okay, I'm sure you get it. So with parts, one of the interesting things is that parts can have disagreements with other parts of ourselves. And this is kind of the basis of a lot of what we deal with in IFS therapy. So as an example, let's just say that as we're growing up with this evolutionary drive to survive and this kind of need for belonging and the sensitivity to rejection or the sensitivity to any sort of in-group, out-group dynamic or feeling alone, abandoned, anything like that, right? If we're wired to not feel those feelings, we would develop parts of ourselves that are there to make sure that we do whatever we need to in order to gain the favor and the belonging of the tribe, of the family, of society around us, in order to make sure that we don't drop on the hierarchy, that we are ascending in the hierarchy, and that we belong so that our survival is guaranteed. Does that make sense? So we develop parts that become insurers of our survival this way, right? And often we'll have parts that judge these other parts, right? So we will have these kind of strict, kind of inner critic taskmaster parts that may find fault or judgment or shame in other parts. And so we will have parts that hate other parts of ourselves, or that judge other parts of ourselves, or that criticize other parts of ourselves. Or sometimes it's as simple as we have two different parts with two different value sets and two different sets of needs and drives and agendas that conflict, that don't work well together, where the needs from one and the needs from other just don't mesh. And so they're just always at odds with each other because this one's trying to get this need met for you and this one's trying to get this need met for you, and they don't work. There's all kinds of examples of this, and this is a very common human experience that I think most of us tend to kind of gloss over and not really notice how much we feel inner conflict between these different parts of ourselves, right? And a lot of times what happens, for example, is people will abandon the needs of certain parts of themselves in order to overfeed other, parts of themselves, because that's where maybe the reward was in life, or that's where it seems like the reward will be. We've bought into that. So there's self-abandonment of parts or self-conflict of parts and all this kind of stuff. So we have all this kind of challenging, crunchy dynamics that pop up between our parts. Now, not always, this isn't a universal, but these are very, very common experiences. Okay, so believe it or not, I know I'm rambling a little bit, but hopefully this is interesting and making sense, and I'm pushing us towards the punchline here. So why do people struggle with self-love so much, right? That's the question. Well, I want you to think about it like this. If self for you is all your parts, right? Like when you're going about your day-to-day and you're cruising through life, you're not tracking which part of you is operating through your personality. You're not tracking as you switch parts. You're not tracking which part is driving what thoughts. You're not tracking which part is driving what emotions and what their relationships are between the different parts inside of you. You're operating under the assumption that you're just one singular personality, one singular being, which you are ultimately, with just one facet, and you're just going about your life, doing what you need to do, doing what makes sense in the moment, right? What you may not be considering is that you see yourself from each part's point of view, if that makes sense. So you feel inside every part. You feel the feelings, the needs, the fears, the desires, the drives of every part of you. So when one part of you starts judging another part of you, what you feel is the judgment. When one part of you starts shaming the other part of you, what you feel is the shame and the judgment, right? You feel both. What you feel when one part of you doesn't love another part of you is the unlovedness and also the unwillingness to love. Right? And so this is what I think is at the root of this inability to, feel self-love so easily for most people. I think for most people, what it boils down to is deep internal parts conflicts that haven't been worked out, haven't been negotiated, haven't been harmonized and balanced out and integrated and healed, which can be done, by the way. This is why. Most of us don't feel self-love because we're judging ourselves, because we're operating through parts that are we're trying to push ourselves. Usually, this is what I see happen over and over and over when I talk with clients. This is what I've seen work with myself. This is what I see when I read online or read in books or study. More often than not, we are trying to push ourselves through force to comply to whatever behaviors we need to do in order to belong to society, right? So we're prioritizing the external over the internal, first of all, in order to belong maybe to our family, in order to belong to a dysfunctional set of old values that we picked up when we were kids, maybe in order to have belonging of some sort, even if it's fucked up, dysfunctional belonging. We will push ourselves to belong. And the way that most people seem to have internalized pushing ourselves to belong isn't through love, isn't through encouragement, isn't through negotiating with ourselves, isn't through kindness to ourselves, isn't through self-empowerment. It's generally through self-judgment. It's generally through self-shaming, self-guilting, and because this is what's modeled for us by our society, by the role models in our society, by the attitudes and in the implicit concepts in our society, and often, not always, but often by our parents, right? So that's been modeled for us externally. Our unconscious mind picks up the modeling, creates a part that kind of reflects that model because that's the model of how society motivates you. And then we apply that towards the other parts of us that have other needs that are in conflict with this need to belong and this need to, operate in alignment with the social rules, with the social game around us. And what we end up feeling is that we don't love ourselves, right? I think another part of this that also doesn't get acknowledged or spoken about a lot is that I think that for most of us, our wiring, because we're wired to survive in the tribe, is more towards pleasing others than pleasing ourselves for most people. I think most people are wired to self-abandon, if you will, if it means that we're going to be fed and clothed and protected, right? We will give up deep self-alignment in order to make sure that our safety and our survival needs are met. And so, because most people are operating on a default psychology that hasn't been looked at, hasn't been healed, hasn't been explored, hasn't had all the trauma released out of their nervous systems. This is most of us. We just, It's like one step after the next step after the next step in life. And as we're just stepping forward on a default path, not really thinking about all the things we've picked up along the way and all the bullshit ideas we've picked up and all the flawed concepts and all the bad thinking and all the negative emotions and all the judgments and all the shaming and all the little traumas, along with, God forbid we have big traumas in life, little traumas that we accumulate along the way too, that are all stored in our nervous systems that haven't been released, right? And all of that adds up to this sense of pressure, shall we say, right? That society puts on us and that we, mirror and put on ourselves and also put on others, right? It's a two-way street, right? We end up projecting this outwardly as well, right? And this is what's at the heart of, this is kind of what's in the way, if you will, of self-love, right? So it is possible to heal all this. It is possible to reevaluate the entire chain of everything I just explained to you, from starting with, the assumptions and the fears about survival, and the assumptions and the fears about belonging, right? And the assumptions and the fears about anxiety of ascending the hierarchy or not, right? Really getting conscious about that stuff, deciding for ourselves what our heart's deepest truth is around those things first. And, and there's nothing wrong with valuing ascending the hierarchy or valuing belonging or valuing survival. I'm not saying those are wrong or bad or unhealthy. I'm saying get conscious about them, like choose them like with will, with intent, not just allow them to be background programs. They're there. Those fears are there, but look them in the face, right? And then from there, what's the next step up in the chain? Well, then looking at society's values and the rules that are required in order for you to belong to society. And do you agree or do you disagree? And which ones do you agree with and which ones do you think are dysfunctional? And really get conscious about what belonging games you want to play in society. Because if it's costing you self-love to belong, that may be too high a price for you. I think it is for a lot of people, but again, if we're not conscious of that, if we're just operating on default assumption, then we've never made that choice. And we haven't really reflected in order to choose ourselves or not, right? And then from there, you can look at having a negotiation with your parts. You can start to do parts integration work, which is something I do with clients, by the way. Or you can, go to an IFS therapist, or, this is a huge part of what they do in psychedelic therapy these days, is doing parts work. And a huge part of when you're using psychedelics and you're interacting with these, these entities and these personas and these deities and these demons and these weirdos and these characters, they might be parts of your personality that are being projected, right? So integrating, negotiating, working with harmonizing your parts so that your system works as a whole better, right? Healing the fears, the traumas, the needs, the contractions, the constrictions inside each part so that they're not being driven by trauma and fear and flawed concepts that were created when you were a little child, but that they're updated and current for you, right? Bringing all of that together. And when your parts can learn to love your other parts and all your parts harmonize and are in mutual agreement, and when you know your own value system and you honor your own value system, and when you know where you disagree with society and you're okay with that, and where you agree with society and you're okay with that, and you know which games with society you want to engage in and which you don't, and you have choice and clarity and consciousness of all that together, and it's coming from a genuine place inside of you, what you'll experience is self-love. That's a huge part of what's going to get that out of the way, or at least whether or not that generates self-love, it will clear the path for self-love to arise. I actually think that one of the most profound things that you'll learn exploring psychedelics or exploring your spirituality is that love is an inherent quality in life. In all of life around us, there's a feeling of love when you attune to it. And particularly inside a human being, once you unpack all the fears and doubts and the worries and the anxieties and the traumas, and you get all that shit out of the way and not obscuring you, and you're just simply present. People experience this in Vipassana and meditation all the time. What arises is a profound experience of love, right? And so that love is all encompassing. That's not a conditional love. That's not a, I love you because you do something for me, or I love you because you look a certain way, or because you tell me a certain thing, or whatever. It's true, universal, what the Greeks would call agape, divine love for all beings, for all life. And you can extend that to yourself. That does extend to yourself already. You already have self-love. That's just all these things obscuring it and in the way that I've just detailed out for you and unpacked for you. So it's possible. It's possible to heal all these things. And this is part of the work of psychedelics, is touching that place of self-love inside of yourself, and then looking at your value system, looking at all of these unconscious automatic default agreements you've made with society and with your family and with your culture and with your friends and with the kids growing up in school or whatever else, and really choosing consciously, reevaluating, re-choosing consciously, then looking at the judgments you have against different parts of yourself, the parts of you that are judgy and the parts of you that get judged, and harmonizing those relationships, bringing that all into alignment so that it works as a cohesive whole. I know that love is the fundamental nature of being a human being. It's just we have a lot of shit in the way. We have a lot of crap in the way. So anyways, I'm going to wrap the video here because this is, as usual, longer than I anticipated, but I hope this has been enlightening for you. I hope this has opened your eyes, explained and answered this question for you, and really given you some food for thought on what you might want to work on next to start to move some of that stuff out of the way and get towards that experience of self-love that is available to all of us. If you like this content, if you like this video, do me a favor and thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel. Leave a comment down below if this touched you, or was an aha or an epiphany for you, or in any way really has made a difference for you, because that is my goal here, is to touch hearts, to change lives, to make connections, to truly serve you, and quite honestly to offer back what have been some very hard-won lessons for me to help you speed up your own process. So anyways, without further ado, much love to you all. Thanks for watching if you've gotten this far in the video. I wish you all the best, and I hope that this has really served you well. Take care.